the thoughts that goes through his head and mine too when I see police or even police, you know, actually stops me. I'm like, how many times do we have to deal with this and hear this? I mean, this is insanity. Someone can just walk up and make accusations. No one thought to look at the phone or ask to look at the phone. Everybody just made an assumption that, yes, he stole this phone. And why do people come to that conclusion? I came to the phrase this year, 2020, Fannie Lou Hammer. I am very sick and tired of being sick and tired. There are no excuses for people not calling out these actions by people. They have become a reality of everyday existence, and I'm tired. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing. Yeah, it's people weaponizing their white privilege. Think of Amy Cooper and calling the police on the Black man who was watching birds in the park. I can't think of a less threatening action, maybe sleeping, but watching birds in the park, and not being okay with being called to task for not having your dog on a leash. So I am going to weaponize my whiteness and my privilege, and I'm going to call the police on you. The police that use our tax dollars to protect and serve, I am going to call them against you. And far too often, people of color, locally and around the globe, find themselves in similar situations. A couple of comments in the chat that I wanted to get to. Also, we need to address the issue of colorism. Here and around the world, people seem to be more comfortable interacting with Europeans or someone with lighter skin and European features. So colorism, for anyone who is not familiar, is the negative treatment of darker skinned people, regardless of race. And it happens within communities as well. So thank you for that point, Tiffany. Also from Janet, think of how often in the past 40 years, the media has shown us Black men acting violent and getting arrested by the police. So now we should be prepared for the violence against Blacks by the police, and we have been seeing especially over the last 10 years. So if you have a question or a comment before we move on to our next guest, we have a little bit of time left. Please unmute yourself, or you can type your question or comment in the chat. Okay, next up, we have Stephanie Nahara. Stephanie, I hope I pronounced your name correctly. If not, please correct me. Stephanie was also featured in the video, so the floor is yours. If you would like to share about that experience, about instances or experiences that weren't captured, we would love to hear your input.
Okay. Well, my name is Stephanie Nahara. I don't say it in my English accent. It sounds kind of funny. I was in the video and I had the privilege to be asked to be in the video. I don't find my past experiences as traumatizing as most people would say. I find it as, you know, just, how should I say, more, I guess, understanding where someone is coming from. I don't get easily offended. It just depends on how you say it or how you come off. I find it, you know, in the video, I was explaining one of my experiences. This was the year 2016. For those of you familiar with Job Corps, it's a school that's paid for. I was going for my medical assistant, and a gentleman who was my classmate at the time who happened to be African American, lived in Chicago, very diverse city. And I don't know how the conversation came about. We were talking about Mexico and passports, and that's where my generation before me, my parents were immigrants. So my generation is the first born and raised in the States. And with me being Mexican, I, shared, I need to get my passport. We were just talking about passports, something to that extent of traveling. And this gentleman, he came off, oh, don't you got your green card for that? You got your green card. And never in my life have I ever, um, he said it serious, and I didn't know whether to take it as offense, or I didn't know how to react. It caught me completely off guard. And I thought he was joking. And when I asked him, is this a serious question, or are you just joking? Like, haha, green card, Mexican green card. And he's like, no, I'm being serious. And what I got wrong was being under the assumption of him being from Chicago. I thought he would have at least understood, being somewhere in a diverse area, not every Mexican has a green card or needs a green card. And I explained it to him after I understood he was being very serious, and I explained it to him. I was born and raised. I was born in California, but I was raised in Beloit, Wisconsin, ever since I was 2 years old. And I am legally a U.S. citizen. I do not need a green card. If I was born in Mexico, that would be a whole different story, a whole different process. And that's when it caught me off guard in my adulthood that he really thought through his whole life, we weren't that much, how old was I at the time? Geez. I was in my 20s. That's all I can remember. I was in my 20s, and him and I were similar in age. And he through his whole life thought every Mexican had a green card. And I didn't get offended. He proceeded to explain, he was really under the assumption, because he never came in close contact with Mexicans. He never asked that question. He never thought to maybe use Google or to ask, hey, don't be offended, but is this true about Mexicans? I would have respected that even more. But the fact that he brought that up, I was seriously shocked that he really thought through his whole life every Mexican had a green card, and that every Mexican basically with a green card was illegal at some point. And it wasn't traumatizing. It was just a learning experience. Like, wow, this day and age, some people really do think that every Mexican has a green card. And I had the privilege to explain it to him, and I accept he did apologize. He didn't mean any disrespect, and I didn't take it as disrespect. It was more so like I couldn't believe it. I was in shock, and it was a common ground with me explaining it to him, and I was glad to explain it and for him to understand in the future. Just don't assume, don't think, oh, she's Mexican or he's Mexican, they have a green card. And I hope it was a learning experience for the both of us, but more so for him, for assuming things that specify towards Mexicans.
Stephanie, thank you for sharing. Thank you. I think it was great that you referred to it as a privilege to explain it. That was very gracious of you. Sometimes it is not a privilege to explain. It is frustrating and it is exhausting. So I just want to highlight that was a very gracious perspective for you to consider that a privilege. So a couple things in the chat I just wanted to point out. One, thank you, Beth, for putting the link to the Everyday Racism video. A couple people said it was a little choppy with the playback. So if you want to watch that again on your own, I encourage you to do that. Another comment from Katie, another example of weaponizing white privilege is the white neighbor calling the police on the younger Black man living in his coach's house in Monona. So a relatively local story. The coach was allowing him to stay there. And Katie, thank you for putting the link. If anyone wants to check that out, we appreciate you doing that. There was one from Mark right above that. I just wanted to highlight regarding Dr. Kinde's remark about consumerism of racism. Won't it take a revolution to change our culture? Yes, fortunately and unfortunately, yes, Mark, it will. But it starts with acknowledgement. We have to acknowledge what we're consuming, and then figure out how that's impacting our actions, our thoughts, how we interact with people, what preconceived notions we have, and the impact of those preconceived notions on our actions. So Mark, thank you for contributing to the discussion. And then finally from Linda, aggressions are acts that are intended to hurt others. Sometimes people are just ignorant in what they say of people of color, but it may still be hurtful to the recipient. Thank you for taking the trouble to clear up the ignorance of that person. So Stephanie, I think that one was for you. Yeah, and microaggressions can be intentional or unintentional, but they're always harmful. And if you're on the receiving end of harm, intent may or may not matter to you. Intent may or may not lessen the harm that you are experiencing. So it depends on the person. Other questions or comments? Stephanie, are there other things that you would like to share or add to the discussion?
Yes, I would. It just, when we made the video, it didn't cross my mind at the time because it was more so what did I experience. But I wanted to kind of bring forth, I have a 10-year-old daughter. She just turned 10 on Thanksgiving. And with us being a bilingual household, I am very proud to be bilingual, very proud that Spanish was my first language. And I eventually learned English while in school. Same thing with my siblings. My daughter is in a dual language program where they teach English and Spanish, no matter your ethnicity, no matter your race, no matter what status you are. You have the privilege to learn a different language. And I've noticed with my daughter and my nieces and their generation, with everything that's been going on with politics and all that, I've noticed she would be a little shy in public to speak Spanish. And I didn't think anything of it, and I've never been ashamed of who I am. I've never been ashamed or where I came from in my culture. But I've noticed that with all these politics going on, with people getting called out for speaking a different language, for, oh, they must be talking about me because I don't understand their language. English is not everybody's first language. That was not my first language. And I tell my daughter all the time, be proud of who you are, whether you knew Spanish or not. And she is bilingual, being as young as she is. And I want to make sure I instill that in my children. Be proud of who you are. Be proud of where you come from. We're not all the same. We are not perfect people, but I want to show my children how I was raised. My parents came here illegally. At the time I was little, I never understood what it meant, when my parents would explain their stories and why they came over here to the States to provide a better life, and us being fortunate enough to have them as an example. And I tell my daughter that all the time. She has 2 younger brothers now, and I tell her, you set your example to your brothers. You be proud of who you are. You be proud of, you keep your head high, and if someone calls you a name that goes towards you being Mexican, that's their opinion. That doesn't mean that you are that thing. That doesn't mean that you have to listen to what they're saying. I've been called things, with my race, my ethnicity. I brush it off, but not everybody's the same. And I want to make sure that my daughter and their generation don't let these politics, don't let ignorant people, don't let anything that's going on within these past few years affect them as a young generation. And I tell her, be proud of who you are. It is not your fault that you are Mexican. It is not your fault that you're bilingual. It is not your fault that you are, in my eyes, a perfect little girl with freckles on her face like her mom. You know, she's just shy when it comes to Spanish, and I tell her, be proud. It's not your fault. And just if people come at you with all respect in the world and ask you a question, you know, take it as you teaching them something. You know, this is what my culture taught me. This is, you know, just embrace it and don't be ignorant to other people. And she would ask me different things like, Mom, you know, the other day, Mom, like, why is my hair like this? And why is my friend's hair different than mine? And her friend is a little black girl. And I would tell her, you know, everybody's different. You know, just enjoy your differences. You know, you guys are different, but that doesn't mean you can't be friends. And I just wanted to say that part because that did bother me that I didn't say it in the video with my daughter and with everything going on. They're too little to be ashamed of who they are. They're too little to be experiencing anything like this. This is nothing that brings good to anything, honestly. And I just wanted to share that piece about my daughter, and hopefully the younger generations would keep their head high and be proud of who they are and where they come from.
Stephanie, thank you so much for sharing that. Yeah, I'm also a DLI parent, so I definitely get the benefits of that. If I could just point out one thing and use what you said kind of as an example, when you said it's not your fault that you're Mexican, for me, I experience that as the way we consume racism, because I would think like, what I did in my head was I flipped it. So if I was talking to my child and I said, it's not your fault, you're Black, for me, I see that as a blessing. But the fact that we would, you know, that you would say it's not your fault, I think that's a byproduct of consumerism. Like it is a blessing from my perspective to be Black, and even to be Black in America. And I just think that the subtle ways of how we describe things or how we talk to people, even our children, about things, is a part of that consumerism. And what we have been taught is the standard, and how we have to unlearn a lot of things and say, no, that is not the standard for me. I set the standard. So just some thoughts there. We have a couple other comments in the chat. Oh, question for James. Thank you, Bob. James, how do you address unconscious bias or microaggressions with your students at Fresh Start?
One of the things we do, we've had some courageous conversations, because one of my roles and responsibility is I am a teacher, and we have what we call role plays, and it's been very powerful. And some of the role plays we do is that we have students to get themselves in situations where it could be a racism situation, and how do they respond to it? And so after a situation there, we have a panel of students will sit down and do a summary how an individual react to it and how should we respond to it. So most of the things that we do is about role playing. And then what I would do is sit down and talk about their questions and summarize some of the things that actually happen in our community, or those things that happen to an individual. So we have had the same type of conversation about courageous conversation, especially in Beloit. And so most of the things that we talk about is through role playing and just having some meaningful conversation like we're doing. It is toned down a little bit with the students, but it is very courageous, and we have these conversations that's very powerful. We talk straight up and talk about racism. We talk about situations, and then they relate some things they may have saw in the news media. We talk about the news media, not just in Beloit, but things that happen around the country. So we have these powerful conversations, and one of the things that I hope with our base of students, that we talk about changing mindsets. How is them going forward? How would they instruct their own family when they become parents? How that powerful conversation when they become parents, how would they deal with racism? How would they deal with the conversations there? So that's how we address those things and racism through powerful conversations, just like we're having here.
Okay, James, so you know what my next question is. Give me one of those scenarios and walk me through how that went. And then I'm particularly interested in knowing how our students are processing these experiences and what impacts those experiences are having on them. And what does their support system look like outside of Fresh Start? And you can keep it general, but this is a lot. This is heavy for adults. And who outside of you all, and I know you're doing a wonderful job, but is there to help our students process these situations?
Okay. One of the things that's interesting that kept repeating itself is a Black man wearing a hoodie. And it had become such a pronounce now, which came up in a very strong conversation. One young man had an experience at a gas station. He walked in the gas station and he had a hoodie on, and he noticed the attendant behind the counter just really got nervous, excited, and after he approached the counter, she told him to pull that hood down so that she could see his face. And obviously it was a white attendant, and he said, "Ma'am, why?" It was a young white guy into the gas station as well. And he waited by the door, and when this white young man came to the counter, she never asked him to pull his hoodie down. And he was so enraged, and he knew it was a racism situation. And we had a powerful conversation with that. The interesting thing about that, Amy, my wife brought me a couple hoodies. I'm not a hoodie guy. And she brought me a couple of hoodies, and I tell you, race back in my mind is saying that, what if I wear a hoodie driving my car and get stopped? And these are the things, that mental thing that has happened to us as Black men, wearing a hoodie with the Mr. Martin situation with the hoodie. So those things are still racing through our minds about even hoodies. How can I go to anywhere with a hoodie on unless I am going to be faced with racism? So we had a powerful conversation about hoodies. And the young men at that time said, you know what? I am afraid to wear a hoodie, especially going into isolated places like a gas station. And the other part of that question that you may have, I don't think there's very many support groups out there to have courageous conversation with our young people. At least I haven't found any or heard of any, Amy.
Thank you for that. So you guys are a little quiet this evening. So I'm going to turn the floor over to all of our participants. How are you processing the information that has been presented? What is your experience with unconscious bias? This is a safe space, so only share what you're comfortable with. What is your experience with microaggressions? Have you been a giver of a microaggression and not realizing it at the time? Have you since been able to process that and maybe repair harm? Have you acknowledged it and not wanting to deal with the situation? What experiences are we having in the audience? Please feel free to unmute, or you can drop your comment in the chat, either to everyone or to me privately, and we can discuss.
Amy, can you hear me?
I absolutely can.
One of the things that I was thinking about is two issues, really. One of the things is the fact that a lot of people assume that all Black people grew up in a microcosm of a ghetto or with a lot of Black people, that we've all grown up like that. The other one is that we all have the same background. Just because you're Black don't mean that you have the same background. So when we have discussions about me growing up in Beloit and being in classrooms and be one of two Black kids in a room, because when I went to school, when I was younger and went to school in Beloit, there were so few Black people in Beloit. Now remember this, I'm talking about the 50s. When I went to a lot of the schools that I went to, I was one of 2 kids in a room. So we didn't grow up with a huge population of African-American people in Beloit. So a lot of things people assume, that I have the same experience that a lot of people did in Chicago and other places. That's not true. Secondly, is that all of our backgrounds are the same. And I hear people discussing it when they talk to me as if I have a hands-on experience about what it is to grow up, let's say in a situation like Chicago, where you have neighborhoods where I've had Black people tell me that they didn't even have any interaction with white people till they were grown. They grew up in some of those ghetto, but some of those projects where they didn't interact with white people, period, until they were grown. They had no interaction. So we all come from different places. Doesn't make any difference about skin color. We just come from different places. And I think the assumption is that we all have the same background. The other part was my grandson and I, who's in his 20s, was watching a movie about the death of, I'm trying to think of the young man that just down south that was killed when he was 14, coming from Emmett Till. And so he had heard something about it, didn't have a lot of background about it. We discussed that. He said, we never talked about that at Black History or anything in school. We talked about the riots that Black Wall Street. We talked about other places that had been burnt down, that those were not things that they were ever taught. Those are things I learned when I got older. So a lot of the background, and that's why I said that. I told him most Black history is taught about slavery and getting here. There's very little discussion about the accomplishments that a lot of Black people had in the 40s and the 50s, and they did some great things, and what happened to them. So we have a whole history that has been left out for our kids, that they don't understand that Black people were really very accomplished in the 40s and the 50s, and they were moving on until these kind of incidents destroyed whole communities. So those are the kind of things that we have to, and I think sometimes that they're not told, because if you don't give credit to a community or a population, then you don't have to see them as people. And so that, to me, if we don't tell the truth about what this country has really done and things that really happened, how can you build on it? How can people respect our race when a lot of white people have no idea about some of the accomplishments that Black people have done in the past? I mean, we've not all been worked for white people. We weren't all slaves. People own their own properties. Those are the kind of things that I think that if we're going to have a real relationship with people in this country, then we have to be honest about what really happened in this country.
Thank you, Ms. Harrell. Several good points there. The accomplishments of Black people in the past and in the present. And absolutely, Black people are not a monolith. And thank you for highlighting that. Beth also put a couple more links, thank you, Beth, in the chat. If you're not familiar with Fresh Start, there's a link there. And then Janet, thank you, not just a mental thing, but it could be dangerous. So going back to the hoodies, yeah, a piece of clothing could be a dangerous thing for you to wear, not just a controversial thing, but a dangerous or even deadly thing for you to wear. So yes, thank you. I am going to turn the floor over very soon to Stephen, who helped put this film together. But we do have a couple minutes if there are other comments from the audience. If there are things you are learning now about microaggressions in either of those 3 categories, about unconscious bias, about everyday racism, that has not been your experience, but you are learning more, how are you processing that? What impact, if any, is that having on your life?
Hi, Ms. Levy. I'd like to just follow up Ms. Harrell's comment about what's taught in education. I graduated from Parkview, Orfordville in 1987 and followed the college path of the, either it was college or blue collar work, basically were the two options out there. And I remember in my US history class, when we got to the issue of civil rights, I was really excited because here I was learning about Martin Luther King and began reading in our book. And I remember it as well as watching a video. I can see it right there, and reading this paragraph about Martin Luther King and the civil rights and turning the page excitedly to learn more. But that was it. That was it. It was a paragraph about 12 lines long. That was it. And this is 1987 that I graduated. So I took US history probably my junior year. It just wasn't covered. And in terms of unconscious bias, and it's something that I'm guilty of myself. I remember I worked at Beloit College with the BioQuest Bedrock projects, and we would have annual conferences and invite scientists from all over the country to come to our workshops. And it was Beloit College in the Chamberlain building. And sometimes we would get people walking through from the community. It was before it was a really locked building. And I'll never forget one day I heard somebody walking down the long corridor, and I went out to see who it was, and there was a Black man with a heavy fur coat walking, and he had a certain swagger about him, and I thought, oh my goodness, this guy is in the wrong place. And I thought, okay, rather than having the secretary go out and deal with, getting him somewhere else, because I didn't know how she would handle the situation, I thought I'll just, ask him to, if he needs to find where he's going. It was our keynote speaker for the evening.
Oh my
And
gosh.
yes, oh my gosh. And I can't tell you, I was a grown adult when this happened. I had never seen a Black man who had a PhD in sciences. I had never seen a Black person in graduate level sciences. Never. Had I seen from Mideastern or Chinese, non-white, yeah, but Black from America, no. And that was my bias.
Mhm.
Boy, I went home that night and I cried. I cried.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that experience. Thank you. And we all have biases, and how those present are very interesting, and what will we do with them is the question. And thank you for bringing up that education piece. It is incumbent upon parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles. We have to teach our own history. And until we can get it into the schools, we have to teach it in our homes, in our communities, in our churches, etc. My two children have the blessing of being raised by two educators, one of them a chemist. So Tia, another Black chemist, and the other a social studies teacher by training. But it's about exposure. And as often as we can post-COVID-19, we have to give our children or any child in our life that we love those experiences, taking them to the National Underground Railroad Museum, taking them to museums that highlight Black history, taking them to HBCUs to visit, to get to know professors, etc. So that exposure opens your world up, because when you can see someone who looks like you, who's doing something interesting and dynamic, it makes it a little bit easier for you to get there yourself. So Tia, thank you again for sharing that. I am going to turn the floor over, and this doesn't end our conversation, but adding a new dynamic to Stephen. Thank you so much for being patient. So Stephen Pickering put this video together, and we would love to hear from you. Is this the typical project you work on? If not, how did this impact you? If you want some if you have some behind the scenes information that you are able to share with us, we'd love to hear it. So Stephen, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
All right. Yeah, this was a really neat project to work on because it was, we don't usually do these kinds of videos, but we do a lot of corporate capital campaigns, marketing videos. But we're also really passionate about storytelling. And so we knew that this was something that would be really neat because there are stories that we could share. But it was also a little bit daunting because if you set out to create you see this all the time with big brands when they try to relate to a certain demographic and they go all out on it, or they don't really relate correctly to that demographic or that group, and they get called out on it because they're just trying to make a political statement or just trying to reach a certain group, whether they're a consumer or they're just saying, no, we support this group, and they don't really understand them. And so it was a little bit daunting for me because I don't know racism the way that these interviews how they see it. And so so we were really careful, and from the very beginning, speaking with Beth and with really everyone we worked with Community Action, talking about what the goal of the video was for, and it was really to share stories. And so when it really came down to the simplicity of that, we just wanted to share these stories and give a platform and give power to other individuals who have no association with Community Action, who might be across the country somewhere, who might see that, giving them that little bit of encouragement to say, you're not alone. And these are some stories that others have shared. I thought that was a much easier undertaking to just share these stories. And so I think over the course, it was maybe a few different days, I think, that we filmed, and we put together, or we came up with about 2 hours and 20 minutes or so of footage of the different stories. And so we were tasked with cutting that down. Our goal is 5 minutes, I think, but I think we delivered either a 7 or an 8 or 9 minutes, something like that. We delivered a longer video, and he said, so we really need to cut it down. Beth gave some feedback, and I think Mark gave some feedback. But really, there wasn't much that we cut out, and that's why it stayed at 7 minutes. There wasn't much of that rough cut that we delivered, but we had to cut so much. And Stephanie, James, they all had a lot more of the stories that just couldn't make the edit, and it was tough because if it was a marketing video, it's easy to just say, well, is this going to sell the brand? No. Is this going to help the consumers like them more? No. So we can cut that, and it's easy to make those decisions. But with something like this, it's not about making somebody look good or making a brand look good or selling a product. It's really, out of all these stories, in a way, what was impacting me the most. And I had, we've got a few of us with our company, and a few of us were working on this project. So it came to the point where sometimes we'd talk together about something and say, is this something that we can cut? Or does it have to be in here? Does it really tell the story better if we leave this bit in here? And then again, when we got the edit to Beth and a few others on your end, we were able to get some of that feedback to hear what was really powerful, and maybe we made too many cuts, or maybe there was something that we could cut a little bit more on. So yeah, I think it might be more appropriate for anyone if you had specific questions to us or to me to ask those questions. I could try to answer them. The only other thing that I would say is I think it actually might have been while we were editing this video, because we have a home office. And so oftentimes we were editing with our headphones on, but we still need to take them off to play it in the room and hear what the levels sound like. And it was always awkward playing the very opening line of the video. I was called a nigger because that's something that my children, they're homeschooled and so they don't have as much, I don't want to say negative exposure, but they don't know that word. And so it gave us an opportunity to explain what it means. And I think that was something that was neat to be able to share with them. And in another time, I don't know if it was before or after this video, but my oldest daughter, I think she was 10 at the time, and she said, why don't people just love each other? And like, that's just, why don't people just love each other? It doesn't make sense that we live in a culture that we pick up these things in culture to say, well, you're a little bit better than that person, or not even race related. You're a little bit better because you've got a better house than that person, or you use more intellectual language than that person. And there's just so much that I think it's not enough to not be racist in your own house, but you also, we need to be teaching our kids anti-racism. We have to be teaching them the total opposite of it. And I think that can be a real challenge, especially when there are just things that even biases that I don't even realize that I may have. So that's all that comes to my mind right now, but I'm more than happy to ask or answer any questions or share any other thoughts if anyone had questions specifically about the video or anything else.
Stephen, thank you for sharing your perspective. Two things that stood out to me. One, I'm glad that this doesn't make sense to your daughter. And two, for me, it was very powerful, your statement. It's not good enough to not be racist in your house. That's a really good start, but how does that extend beyond your house? And how are you a catalyst for that extending beyond your house? In case people don't have the chat open, I just wanted to highlight a couple comments that I'm seeing. It's mind-boggling that people still think racism never and still doesn't happen in the North. Racism is everywhere. It presents different in the North and in the South. As a person who has lived in both places, I actually prefer, not that I prefer racism, but if I'm going to encounter racism, I actually prefer that it's overt. I know exactly what this is, instead of the subtlety, the let me cover it, to let me smile in your face while I'm plotting against you. Just my preference. Katie, thank you for sharing. It's way too easy for white people to be lazy and not want to do anything about racism since they don't experience it and have no motivation to do anything about it. And she goes on a little bit further, but it really requires us to think beyond ourselves. And you may not believe that you are impacted by racism, but when other humans are suffering, it impacts you. And it may not be in ways that are obvious to you, but you can't oppress people without damaging yourself. So just something to keep in mind. So let me open the floor. Are there questions, comments, anything that we've covered this evening? We have about 15 minutes left in our discussion. If you have questions for Stephen, for Stephanie, for James, for Beth, I saw that Mark is on the call. Mark, feel free to jump in if there is a perspective that you would like to share. But what are our thoughts as we have gone through this conversation this evening? Yep.
So
Jen,
Amy, if I could,
go ahead.
I'll share two things. One of the big motivations for doing the video was, I think Shirley said it, or Shirley Williams said it earlier, was the motivation of being sick and tired of being sick and tired. And mine comes from being sick and tired of being one of a few African American faces that this community always turns to and always expects to speak up and speak out. So I wanted to put more people on video and create a bigger platform for other people of color to talk and share their experiences, so it wasn't always just me. That was one of the motivations behind reaching out to do the video. The other was the catalyst piece that you talked about. There are, as we all know, you can count on one hand the number of people of color who are heads of organizations in this community. So as one of those few on the one hand, I thought it was necessary that we take a lead and a stronger stance and a stronger message towards racial justice. So even though the video largely received a lot of praise, it also cost us some. There were people who were very unhappy about the video and very unhappy about the very vocal stance we've taken as of late on racial justice issues. We've gotten a lot of pushback and a lot of backlash in the community. So it hasn't been all sunshine and puppy dogs. But that video exists because the record needs to exist for now and for the future for people to understand. And as long as I'm CEO of Community Action, we will continue to have that large voice. So as I've said to people before, if you have an issue with that, we don't need your support anyway.
Thank you, Mark, for sharing that and the work that you are doing and highlighting and creating a platform for other voices to be showcased, because you're absolutely right. This work is so critically important and is also critically exhausting. And you have to invest in self-care, and you have to expand the platform for other voices to be able to speak up and to speak out. So very grateful for the work that Community Action and other organizations are doing. Janet, yep, please unmute.
I agree. And I think that racism is all around us. Even us white folks, if we're not paying attention, we're missing it. It's there. I have a daughter who's from Korea. She's had, from the time she was an infant, ready to be adopted, people said, haven't you ever heard of the yellow peril? Like she's going to come over and subvert America, you know, she's this baby kind of thing. So that kind of racism was back there then, and it has continued throughout her life. She hasn't always had a very pleasant life because she's Korean, and her children are Korean half, and one is half Korean and half Native American, so they're not quite white people. They have had to deal with two granddaughters up north by Oshkosh were told recently, why don't you go back to your own country, which they're trying to figure out where that is, since they were, you know, they were born here. And so that's one important thing. We have to pay attention to what's going on around us, because it's easier not to. And I also want to add that we have to, I like what you guys are doing with this. It's so important to speak up and speak out and put this in people's faces. And Mark, I was reminded of that fishbowl you had, and I think it was for Courageous Conversations one time, of your youth who were in like a fishbowl thing, and we white Courageous Conversation people were around it, and they were telling us how it feels to be them and what they would like us to know about them. And it was an eye-opening experience. And I would argue that it converted them from Black kids that we don't really know and we don't really know if we trust them, into young people who have ideas and values that we don't understand because we don't know them. And I would say that in a general sense, it left us speechless, because we ended up saying stupid things. You know, the kind of things you say, like, because you're a white person and you and you want to make nice, or you want to make clear that you're not one of the people who are opposing them or judging them, and it left us vulnerable, which is good. It was really good. So thank you, Mark, for that. I think more of that kind of thing, like this video is, giving voice to people, is incredibly important.
Absolutely. Thank you, Janet. So next up we have Jen, and then we'll hear from Mary. Jen, if you could unmute yourself, please.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, thanks. I just wanted to thank the staff members that contributed to the video. And also, Stephen, I can totally relate to what you were saying about, you know, your kids being sheltered and not knowing what the N-word means. My kids asked me after we watched the video, I said, do you have any questions? And they said, what did that mean? And it hit me. I realized, yes, they've never heard that word before, which is a good thing, but it also means that I failed them and that I didn't talk to them about that. They see it in my modeling, they see it in my actions, my community outreach, but that hit me in the forehead like a ton of bricks. So it opened up dialogue for us, huge dialogue. So it's not words aren't enough, actions aren't enough. We have to do both.
Thank you, Jen. Mary, could you go ahead and unmute, please?
Okay. So I've been listening all evening, and I think there's several different layers that I'm hearing. I'm hearing about the microaggressions, which can be really awful, especially if someone is on the receiving end and they're just having a bad day. You know, it's and the microaggressions, you know, they happen. You know, some people are just jerks. Some people are ignorant and unknowing, and some people are mentally ill. And I think I've been looking for a long time. I just had a conversation with someone through the library today where he wanted to believe what he wanted to believe, and he didn't want any information that was going to change his mindset. And it wasn't anything about racism, but it's something I've encountered for years. There are people who just don't want to change their minds. And they don't want to learn new things. So that is exhausting, to be on the receiving end of the little I get, and I'm white. You know, I'm not sure my imagination is good enough to know what it would feel like if my skin weren't white and having to deal with so much more of this. But at the same time, I really, really appreciate Mark putting this video out there, because we are not going to be shifting those individual people who don't want to learn new things. We can't educate them enough unless we change the national conversation. And we can't change the national conversation one person at a time. We have to change organizations through leadership, and not everyone's in a position to do that. But I'm glad to see organizations like Community Action and others that are stepping forward. So thank you.
Mary, thank you. There was a lot there. First thing that stood out to me, there's never a good day to be on the receiving end of microaggressions.
There are better days and there are worse days.
There's that. Never a good day for that. And then I as to your last point, for me, I think it's both and. So yeah, you have to have that organizational leadership and that collective motivation to change, but it's also all of us individually. So if leadership doesn't change, we can't use that, not saying that you were suggesting this, as an excuse, well, oh, I guess that's just how it is right now, or it's not time for that. You have to control your sphere. And that's why I loved, it's not good enough to just not be racist in your house. Like eventually you're going to leave your house. And is it okay to be racist in those environments that you walk into? And if you are not shutting down racism, then are you supporting it? And those are questions that each of us have to answer for ourselves. But there is power in responsibility, because if someone else is responsible, then you have to wait for them to change it before things get better. But if I am responsible, if each of us are responsible for making things better, even those things that you didn't create, then you have the power to impact change. So those are just a few things that stood out for me. Before we end this evening, I'm sure we could go on. Thank you for everyone for coming. I know this is a time of several different holidays colliding in time with family, hopefully some time of rest. So we so appreciate that you took time out of your schedule on the 4th Monday to spend some of it with us. We so appreciate your participation. I do have a couple announcements, and then I will turn the floor over to my partners, Neil and Beth, to see if they have any organizational announcements. The first is that YWCA Rock County will be hosting on our Facebook Live page. We're very excited about this, the Martin Luther King Jr. commemoration. So this is the traditional event that happens annually at Black Hawk Tech. We have taken this virtually. Stephen Pickering filmed this for us. He is currently editing, and I am so excited to see the final result. I know Stephen's going to do a great job. So that is going to initially air on January 16th, which is a Saturday. Happens to be my baby boy's birthday. So January 16th at noon, and that will be on the YWCA Rock County Facebook Live. We had lots of partners who helped to come put this together. So after it airs, they are live. It will be shown. I don't have the details though, so more to come on JATV and BATV. And then some of our partners who helped in planning, I believe, will be posting on their websites, etc., as we move from the 16th. So I just wanted to put that on everyone's calendar. And then also happening in January, Thursday, January 28th will be our winter lunch and learn. If you attended our fall lunch and learn, you will remember that Dr. Lisa Anderson Levy masterfully led us through a conversation about race and how to have conversations about race. So I'm really excited for our winter lunch and learn, more details to come. Neil, Beth, do you have any announcements that we all need to be aware of?
I want to say congratulations to the YWCA for the grant that you received. That's really exciting. And
so thank you, Neil. And then really quick on that, we are so proud and so excited. Please don't think that because we received $1 million that we still don't need your support and your donations. We do. The board is still deciding how to handle this gift. For anyone who's not aware, it was a very generous donation from Mackenzie Scott, former wife of Jeff Bezos of Amazon. And another proud fact that I'm happy to report is that my alma mater, Alcorn State University, located in Lorman, Mississippi, where I received that chemistry degree, was one of the recipients as well of $25 million. So she was very generous in her donations, giving out over $4 billion with a B dollars to 384 minority serving, women serving organizations. So we are so grateful and so proud to be the stewards of that generous donation. I am sure that a large chunk of that will be used for perpetuity. So when you get our campaign opportunities, please continue to contribute.
Beth, anything?
With the news about stimulus bills from Washington, we've already been getting some questions about whether or not community action will have more rental assistance. And so the official answer is when we know and we know the process, we will post it on our website and on our Facebook page. So we will be letting people know if we do in fact have that in the future. So just to let you know, keep an eye out. We don't have anything definite right now.
The other thing I want to just say again is if you want your name on the email list, just write your email in the chat and I will copy it down and include it.
Perfect. And then the final thing I will say, if you have a student in the school district of Beloit, please go to the website and take the distance learning survey. There is a big decision that needs to be made, whether we will continue to be in distance learning or some type of a hybrid. So if you are the parent or guardian of a school district of Beloit student, please make sure that your voice is heard, whatever your opinion is, and take that distance learning survey and encourage other parents and guardians to take that survey as well, so that we have an understanding of the needs and the desires of our community. So I am going to end recording. This now opens